Today, I finally upgraded my app from the Pages router to the app router, from Next.js 12 to the latest version of Next.js. Now, migrating this app from the Pages router to the app router has been one of the most painful things I have done, and the longer I waited, it got worse. But frankly, app migrations shouldn't be this difficult, but more often than not, they are. So, in this specific video, I want to walk you through the entire process of migrating your app from the Pages router to the app router, walk you through the mistakes that I have made along the way so you don't have to experience the same pain as I did. Now, if you have an app that you've been wanting to upgrade, then grab a cup of coffee and please follow along as we migrate our apps together successfully. So let's dive right in. Let me quickly give you a walkthrough of my website, kulkarniagita.com. So when we walk through the code, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Right now, I'm using an announcement bar, and the main purpose of the announcement bar is to promote any existing products or promotions that I'm running. Now, if you click on the specific announcement bar, you can also go to the specific page or the call to action for it. I've started a waitlist for my Next.js course. So if you're interested, then definitely sign up. It's going to be a premium course, and the waitlist folks will get hefty discounts and really cool bonuses as well. So if you're interested, then definitely sign up to that. But let's just dismiss it for now. Now, this is the banner of my website. I have two forms here. And again, I have a form here as well to sign up to my newsletter. Then courses and workshops that I have that are existing. My latest blog posts. Now, this is a React Native course that I have upcoming as well. This is a Next.js course that I'm currently working on. Then my latest blog post here and another newsletter form. I also have a blog here. So the latest blog posts here are the 6 latest ones. But if you go to my blog, then you should also see all the blog posts that I have. We can also filter it by different categories as well. So watch the URL here. If I go to React, then it's slash React. If I click on Next.js, then it's slash Next.js. But let's say if I click on any specific blog post, then it's slash that category and the slug of that specific blog post. If we go to free goodies, again, you can filter it by front end and leadership and all. And again, these are all the different free goodies that I have created for all of you. So definitely check it out if you're interested. This is the current one I'm working on, which is the Next.js hot tips. So I shared best practices there. And if you click on it, then it will take you to the link and you can sign up there. It's a free course. I also have these paid premium courses and products that I have created in the past. And these are the different conference talks that I have given. For example, if you click on it, then you should be able to see my slides and what the talk was about. And the about page is all about me with some of my social links. So if I'm on Twitter, if you're interested, then definitely follow me there or go to my LinkedIn. And obviously, this is my YouTube channel. So subscribe there as well. If you click on subscribe, then you should also see my latest newsletter issues as well. So this is essentially my website. I have other things like showing a modal here if I want to promote anything or if I want to ask people to sign up to a specific piece of content that will help them, then I do that, but I do it very selectively. And towards the bottom, I also have a footer with more links as well. This is a cool one. I have snippets. If you click on this specific snippet, you can also like copy paste it as well. So this is all like snippets you can copy paste it and with a description for what that snippet is all about. I really like this. It's pretty cool. All right, so this is essentially this is the code for my website, Kulkarni and GitHub website. If we head over to package.json, these are all the different packages that I'm using, but I want you to focus on this one. I'm using 12.3.4. So the goal of this specific tutorial, this specific video is to upgrade us from Next 12 to the latest version of Next.js and also move away from the pages directory and move away from the pages router to the app router. So all these pages are going to be migrated to the app router, which is the default router in Next.js in versions after Next.js 13. It's totally okay to use a pages router, but I want to use the latest capabilities of server components, client components, server actions, and so on. So it's finally time to upgrade it. This video is going to focus on that. We are going to use this specific guide, App Router Incremental Adoption Guide, to help us migrate from the pages router to the app router. Now, this guide is pretty comprehensive. It gives you additional details and tells you step by step exactly what you need to do. You could see all the different steps here. The first thing we're going to do is check our node version because now the minimum node version is supposed to be 18.17. So if we head over to my website, let's stop the server and type node-v. I am on node 20.13, so we are good here. To upgrade to Next.js version, we also need to copy this command that will upgrade our Next.js and React DOM to the latest version of Next.js. And then we will also upgrade our ESLint as well. So let's just go and paste this. And this is going to upgrade Next.js, React, and React DOM. And now if we head over to the code, and if we go to package.json, then Next.js is on 14.2.9 now instead of 12 point whatever we were on. So we have successfully upgraded. So now if we run the site and go to localhost 3000, then the site should still work, except that we were also going to run into several problems as we upgrade our app so that we are compatible with the latest version of Next.js. The first error is invalid linked with anchor element. In a previous version of Next.js, and you can read more information here as well. But in a previous version of Next.js, the Next.js team didn't necessarily extend the existing anchor element in the browser, but we're wrapping it up with a link component. So in order for us to make the link a link to the browser and make it semantically correct, we had to add a anchor element inside of the link component that comes from Next.js. Now, a way to fix this is by basically just running this specific code mod, but I'm only using the anchor link in one spot, which is inside my navbar. And here I have anchor link wrapped, and I just want my name here. If you head over to localhost 3000, it works because we have removed the anchor link. In the latest version of Next.js, starting with Next.js 13, link does render as a anchor element. So anchor within an anchor is going to be invalid, and that's why we removed it. All right, so now we have upgraded Next.js version. Let's also upgrade the ESLint of our app as well. So let's just go here and paste this. Now, this is upgrading the ESLint config. We are up to date now with our packages. Now, as we upgrade, you can also see that the variance directive has been deprecated in Tailwind. You need to use the layer utilities or layer components instead. Now, if we click on this specific link, you will see more information, such as instead of using the variance directive that was used for adding custom CSS as we liked, we could just use layer utilities. Now, again, in my app, I'm using Tailwind CSS as my CSS framework of choice. So we need to also migrate this as well. In order for us to do that, let's just go to global CSS file where I have my utilities, for example, variants here. They recommended us to just add layer utilities instead. So we can just get rid of this completely, for instance. Now, if we head over to the terminal, let's just restart our server one more time. And the error is gone because we have successfully migrated the Tailwind config as well. Next, let's go to the next steps here and click on migrate from pages to the app router. That's exactly what we'll be doing next. Let's create the app directory where our app router will live, and we will slowly, incrementally adopt pages router alongside app router. So for that, let's just go to our code base and create an app folder. Here, we are going to have two files. One is going to be called layout.jsx file. Now keep this in mind, I'm using JavaScript instead of TypeScript. Eventually, I would love to move to TypeScript, but right now I want to focus on the migration first and later on move to TypeScript in the future. For now, I'm going to keep it as is. Now, this specific layout file is known as the root layout because it is a root layout of your project. It is going to wrap your entire application. So you would want things like the nav bar, the footer, and all those components that you want in all the pages of your application to live here. You also want to move any scripts that you're using that only need to be loaded once to live here as well. So that's exactly what we would be doing now. So this specific root layout, let's just copy the JavaScript code here and paste it. Now it also has the HTML and body elements. Now, this specific root layout also replaces the underscore app and document files inside of the pages router. So let's focus on document first. I am loading all the scripts here in the head element. Now, head does not exist anymore. Head component in Next.js in the pages router was used to extend the browser head and add any scripts or meta tags that we wanted. No, we won't be using it. But for copy pasting reasons, I just copy it, go to layout, and paste it right here. Now let's get rid of head from here and import the script component from Next.js. Now, script component allows us to load third-party scripts in an optimized way. This is a component that comes from Next.js directly. By strategy, after interactive would mean that this specific script will be loaded after the page is fully interactive, which is pretty nice for us. There's one more script that we need from document, which is the no script. Let's copy this and move it to all the way to the bottom here. And now we can safely delete document.js file because we no longer need it. Then we have the app.js file. Now I have a lot of code here that I don't necessarily need, and I'm going to deprecate it as part of this upgrade so I don't move unnecessary code to the app router. The first thing we're going to do is copy the CSS file so all the styling gets applied here. So let's copy it and paste it. Then we are going to focus on this component that I have called layout. And this component has navbar, main, and footer. So we're just going to copy this and move that to the app, move that to the root layout. Now, instead of children, we're going to paste this because children is already copied from the previous component. And let's import navbar and let's also import footer. Now, our root layout is looking pretty good. We can safely now delete underscore app.js file as well. So if we anytime we want to add components inside of your app router, you want to evaluate if the components need to be server component or not. Now, any new component or page that you create inside the app router is by default going to be rendered on the server. It's a server component. It is not a client component. We need to tell Next.js that, hey, this requires client functionality. This does require a browser. So make sure it's a client component and we need to be explicit about it. So if we go to navbar, let's see if navbar needs to be a client component or not. Now, the first thing we see is a router. Now, the minute we see a router, it needs to immediately be a client component because we are using the router. The next thing is a handler. Now, this again needs to be a client component because we are using browser navigation handlers. Now, we are using a handler to basically push the nav to open or closed. Now, if we head over to my website, kulkarniankita.com, and let's go to the mobile view. Here, you can see that I'm showing a hamburger menu whenever it's in mobile mode. But the minute it's in desktop, we show the entire nav bar. This is the reason why we need the handlers. So if we go back to the code base, we need to mark this component as a client component. And a way we could do that is by marking this as use client. So now this has become a client component, so it will be rendered in the browser. So similarly, if we head over to footer as well, footer doesn't need to be a client component because it's purely just rendering JavaScript. It's not using any specific client functionality here, which is awesome. All right, so now navbar is a client component, footer isn't. Everything else is going to be rendered on the server. We have one last thing to do before we test our application. In tailwind config file, we need to add this specific line as well. If you haven't done it, please do, to include the app router as well. All right, so now if we head over to localhost 3000, you will see a non-styled version of Next.js. And that's because index.js is still being served from the pages router. So now let's go ahead and migrate index.js to the app router. The minute we move this file, it's not going to be recognized because the convention in the pages router to create a new page was to call index.js, or if it's a named route, then we need to call it about.js and so on for the about page. But in the case of the app router, in order to define a page, we have specific naming conventions. For example, in order for you to create a new page, we need to call it page.js or page.jsx. So that's exactly what we're going to do here. We're going to rename this to say page.jsx. And since this is the only page.jsx inside the app router, inside the app folder, this is now the default page itself. Now that we have done this, we are going to encounter more errors because this is a get static props function, which doesn't really exist in the app router. But let's just see what the browser tells us. That's exactly right. Get static props is not supported. If you go to this specific documentation, you can see exactly what you can use. Now, luckily, luckily for us, since this page can be converted into a server component, we don't need this use mounted hook that we will talk about in a second. We can just directly rename this and say this is going to be a get data function, and it doesn't even need to be async because this is not a async function. And instead of returning props and returning all post data in there, we can just return this directly. And here, let's just call data, or we had all post data is going to be just get data. And instead of taking it as a prop, we can just directly invoke the function. And that's just the beauty of using a server component directly. Now, has mounted hook checks if the client has been rendered or not. And a way we could do that is by running this on component mount, or when the specific component has been mounted, we set it to true and this returns it true. This way, we don't see any hydration errors on the client side. We don't need to do that anymore because we are converting this page into a server component. Let's move this ConvertKit script to layout and paste it here. We can get rid of head and let's remove has mounted from here as well. So now let's remove this completely and remove any unused imports as well. All right, so now we have our page that's looking pretty good. So now if we head over to localhost 3000, we will now see more errors because again, we need to define which components need client functionality. So if we head over to our page, these are all the different components that we're using. Now we have this next image component and even the next link component that are coming from Next.js. This is a package that we're using for icons, but anything that comes with add components need to be evaluated. So if we go to card list, this specific component does not necessarily need client functionality because it's just rendering the JSX. But if you go to card, this has handlers and this also has routers, the router. So for that, we're going to convert this into a client component by marking it as use client. Similarly, if we go to the newsletter component, this also is using the handlers, handle submit, different lifecycle hooks from React. So this also needs to be marked as use client because we are literally rendering a form in the browser. So if you go here, this is in fact a newsletter component that we're rendering. So now if you refresh the page, those errors are gone. So we have successfully converted a bunch of components into client components and server components. But now there's one more thing we need to do. We are using a completely different router in the latest version of Next.js. Next router was not mounted is a common error that you would get if you're using next/router, which is originally from the pages router and not in the app router. So if you open up this specific error, next router was not mounted, and that's because you're using the wrong import. For instance, if we go back to the app and we are using next router in a bunch of places. For instance, this is complaining about the navbar. So if we go to the navbar component, here we have import use router is from next router. Now this needs to be next navigation. The imports have changed in the latest version of Next.js, so we need to account for that. We can also remove this empty object here. Now if we go back to the app, it also uses the use router. So let's just go to the newsletter component, and here instead of use router, let's call this next navigation. Now there's more to next navigation that we will take a look at a bit later, but now you can see that our page has successfully rendered and we have successfully upgraded our page from the pages router to the app router, which is pretty awesome. Now, if you want to see if which components are rendered on the server versus the client, let's just go to, let's just open this up here. If you go to Webpack internal, you will see all these components are now client components because we have marked them as client components. For example, newsletter is a client component and so is card. But these components such as highlight, navbar is also a client component that we have marked. But tags and highlight were not necessarily marked as client components, but they end up becoming client components because one of the other client components are using them. So a child of a client component, even though you don't mark them explicitly, is also going to be a client component, and that's something that we need to just live with. Or we can refactor our code, but in this case, these components are way too tiny, so we don't need to worry about it. But these are all the components that are essentially included in the client bundle. So the browser is responsible for rendering them. But our index page and all the other components that I'm using in the app are not client components. They are, in fact, server components, which is pretty awesome. This is a good little test you can run in your app to see. Now, if we refresh the page, we do see this hydration error. It says that hydration failed because the initial UI doesn't match how it was rendered on the server, and the semantics is not right. Now, if we go back to the code, and the spot where this is occurring is in fact in card list and in card, for instance, where we're using the tag. So we have the link component here, and then tag also has a link component, and that's why it's not working correctly. So we can just move tags outside here. And now when we refresh the page, it still works. So now we can still navigate it, for example. So we can still go to another page. Now it's not working here, but we can still go to another page. So if we go here, it still looks fine and our hydration error is gone as well. Now it's time for us to define the SEO. If we go to page.jsx, we have a component here called as the SEO component. Now, I created this component so I don't have to manually add title, description, and so on, all the meta tags that we have here inside every single component, every single page that we have, every single page that I have. But in the app router, things are a little different. In pages router, all you could do is wrap a head component and then manually add all the meta tags. But in the case of app router, it's a little different. There are two ways you could define the SEO for your page. One is you could export a constant and call this metadata. This is going to be for static SEO, static content, where we are going to manually add the title and the description for your site, for instance. But in the case of dynamic metadata, you would need to use a function and then generate that SEO metadata dynamically, which we would do a bit later. But for now, for the index page, we want to get rid of this specific component. We can just copy this title, move it here. Similarly, let's go to seo.jsx, and here let's copy this description and also add it here. Now, our metadata, title, and description is pretty set. So now if we head over to our website, let's refresh the page. The first thing you're going to see is I have a title here already called as Ankita Kulkarni's website. Also, if we go to the browser developer tools and open up head, then we should also see a description, which is exactly what we said. So the meta tag got automatically added. So the meta tag got automatically added here because we created a so the meta tag got automatically added here because we exposed a metadata constant and exported it in layout, and we added it in root layout. Now, if you want to do the same inside of this specific page, we could do that too by again exporting metadata here or any of the pages in the future. But let's say we want to add dynamic metadata, dynamic SEO. Then we could do this something similar here as well. And for that, you could look into adding SEO in this specific document, migrating next head. Again, this is something that we talked about, but if you want to look at more metadata options, then we would use a function called generate metadata. Again, something we will look at later, but we can generate dynamically as well. Similarly, if we want to update the icon here, then we could basically just add icons and then add icon here with the icon. Now let's just go to SEO, copy these two things, paste it in here. Now in case of icon, it's going to be favicon. If we go back, you can see that I have a favicon icon here as well. Similarly, let's add the canonical URL as well. So for that, we're gonna set up meta date base. We're gonna say new URL, which is just gonna be prod URL, for instance. Or let's just call this origin URL because in local environment, it's something different. And then we have alternates, which is just gonna be canonical. Oops. Which is just gonna be origin URL here. There you go. So now we have title, description, icons, metadata base, and alternates. All we need is an OG image. And for that, we're gonna add a tag called open graph with images, which can be an array. So you don't just have to provide one, you could provide multiple. But again, going back here, if you take a look at OG image, then let's just copy this code and move it inside layout. And let's just say actual OG image. Now this specific code is definitely more applicable. And now when it comes to the images itself, we could just do /og image.png. Now in the public folder, if we go to images and we have OG image, which is this specific image. So we can say /images/OG image. So if we head over to the head tag and then let's refresh the page one more time. If we head over to the head tag and if you look at canonical, this is the URL, title, description, OG image is this. If I click on it, then it goes to the specific gradient as we want. So everything is working as expected. So inside the page, we could get rid of this altogether. And if you notice that they have also generated a bunch of Twitter metadata tags as well. So for example, Twitter cards and so on too. So we don't need to do anything special for this. We didn't need to add anything that was there in the SEO for all the Twitter meta tags. It automatically created it for us, which is exactly what we are looking for. Now let's move the blog page to our app router. So if we head over to pages, and then let's just go to blog, let's copy this or let's just move this to the app router. Now this one is going to be renamed to page.jsx. And now that we have this, we should start seeing errors that should pop up, for example. The first thing we're going to do is migrate our get static props. Now get static props inside the pages router allowed us to statically download the data at build time. Now get static props in the pages router allowed us to download the data at build time. Inside of the app router, we need another function called as generate static params. This specific function does something similar, and it can now in the pages router, we had a function called as get static props that allowed us to download the data at build time. But in the case of server components, we could just migrate this function inside of the blog because it will be rendered on the server anyway. So if we head over to our migration guide from Next.js, and if we take a look at get static props, then in the app directory, we could just directly call it itself. We can directly just call it inside the page. So that's exactly what we will do. Because by default, in the app directory, its cache is force cache, which allows us to cache data by default. But in this case, it will be just download the data as well. So let's just call this get data. And then instead of, again, no async here, just function. And instead of returning props and all that fun stuff, let's just return this directly. Now, instead of all post data, we're just going to have all post data equals get data, for example. All post data should work as expected. And SEO is something we will take a look at right away, right after. Let's take a look at our site. And if you go to blog, it works because now we are just caching the data. Now, if we take a look at SEO, this is also static. So we could pretty much just copy what we had here. We can just do get export const metadata because again, there's no need for us to dynamically generate the data. So here, this is gonna be, for instance, blog post descriptions. Our description is gonna be this one right here. Then we have the canonical path, which is gonna be slash blog. So we could just have alternates, canonical, and then we are going to have slash blog here. And this is going to be the description that we could just copy here, and canonical path, and that's it. So we can get rid of this altogether. And we have exposed the metadata, and I always like to expose it as the first thing, whatever we want to export it from the page. All right, so now if we go back and open up browser developer tools and go to the head element, and if we head to blog post as the title, and we can see it right here as well, and the canonical URL is slash blog. Now the good thing about this implementation is because we're adding slash blog, and because we're adding metadatabase as the origin URLs, which is on in production, it's gonna be my website, and then in development it's going to be localhost 3000. In all the individual pages we could just add the rest of the path, and it's going to automatically inherit that from the root layout, which is pretty handy. So this means less code for us. So now we have successfully transitioned blog as well. Now, as I've mentioned before, that whenever you go to the blog, for instance, and let's say you go to any specific category such as React, Next.js, leadership, career, React Native, GraphQL, all of these are category slugs. But then once you click on any specific blog post, then this becomes a slug, the blog post slug. So that's the page that we would be migrating now. We have already migrated the blog to the app router. So let's take a look. Now in the pages router, we have these two routes. These two are dynamic routes. One is the category slug and the other one is the slug. So let's migrate them one by one. So let's migrate the category slug first. Now, what we're going to do is in the app router, let's create a new page called as category slug, for instance. In fact, we could just move the whole thing. So let's just delete it for 1 second. Let's just move this entire directory here. Now in the category slug, let's call this page.jsx. Now, these are all the different categories as we saw, and we have get static props function, get static paths function, and the category page itself. Now, what serves the page is get static props. And as we looked at earlier, we can pretty much migrate this function inside because this category page is going to be a server component. Now, if we take a look at the category page, there is, for example, let's look at React. There is nothing here that needs client. Everything could be rendered on the server. We have this filter functionality, which we check based on the route itself, but everything else could be server component itself. That's exactly what we're going to do. So we are going to convert this into get data. And instead of exporting the function, we don't need to really anymore. The importance of exporting only comes in play when we are using, for example, when we're migrating get static paths to something else to generate the paths for this specific page, then we could have to do something like that. Then we have to do something like that. But otherwise, we don't need to export a function. All right, so here we have all of this. Now we could just get rid of props because we don't need it. That was very much needed for the pages router itself. And now we have all post data, category slug, and category description. And all of this can just pretty much come from get data. So we have exactly what we copied and get data. Now, get data does need params, and we could just get the params from the page itself. Every page has access to params. So, for example, params would be React Native is a param. And then if you click on the specific blog post, then this is also another param. And if you may ask how the params get defined, well, category slug, because it's a dynamic route, becomes a param, and the slug with the box bracket becomes another param. So in category slug, we do have access to the category slug as a param. But notice one thing, we also have category slug here. So let's make sure that we don't cause any conflict. So let's just destructure category slug here, but then let's just call this category slug params, just to be specific. Now let's pass this directly. Now again, we don't need to destructure params here. We could just pass in category slug params, or even category slug, just in general. So now here it will be category slug, which is going to be category slug params. Everything else should stay the same. We would migrate the SEO, but let's comment this out for now. Now let's check the page. If you go to localhost 3000, go to React, then there you go. We have our page getting displayed here. All the different routes are getting displayed. And the reason why we don't need to convert it any into a client component, it's because we are getting the category slug directly, which we are feeding it to the page through the params and just displaying it essentially. Now let's again migrate the SEO as well. Now in this case, we have to do something interesting for SEO. But before we do that, let's first tackle let's first look at get static paths. Now get static paths essentially returns paths, and it goes through the list of categories that I have defined here with title and description, and then it returns the category slug, basically a map of different category slugs with fallback equals false. So if we go to the Next.js documentation and let's head over to the app router documentation here. And if we take a look at data fetching methods, and if we take a look at get static paths, in the pages directory, it is used to define the dynamic paths that will be pre-rendered at build time. But in the case of app router, we need to replace it with generate static params. So it's going to be literally a map of IDs, and ID is going to be category slug itself. And we need to do that to basically have it generated during build time. So if we go back here, this is exactly what we're going to do. We're going to call this generate static params, which is exactly what we have here. And then instead of returning paths, we're going to directly return the category. Now let's comment this out for now, and let's return the category directly here. There you go. So now this specific function is going to work as expected and generate it. But we also need to delete params here because we just need to return the category slug directly. So we are mapping through the categories that we have, that's such as React, Next.js, and so on, and then fetching the title and displaying it, fetching the title and displaying it over here. But what exactly is fallback equals false then? Well, again, if we go back to replacing fallback section, in the pages directory, the fallback property returned from get static paths is to define the behavior of a page that isn't pre-rendered at build time. So let's say if we have a page that the user might go to, do we want to basically show a 404 page, which will be true if we say false, or if we say true, then a fallback page is generated as the new page gets generated. Now, in the case of categories, we have a set of categories. We have a specific set of categories here. There's no need for us to enter something new. So for example, if I add another category, such as instead of next.js, I say Next.js. Right now, it doesn't render anything, for instance, but because we haven't defined anything yet. So we need to handle that correctly, for instance. So with fallback, we could do that. We could add paths, we could add fallback blocking, or we could just say false, and this is not going to be rendered. Now, dynamic segments not included are generated on demand. Now, in this case, we don't want it to because we only have a specific set of categories. So that's exactly what we are going to do. We are going to export a new variable called as dynamic params as false. And this means it's just going to return a 404. So now if we go back to the app and instead of next.js, I'm going to say Next.js. And now it has returned a 404 page, which is exactly what we're looking for. We really don't want to generate something new here. We only have a specific set of categories. So that's exactly how you could implement dynamic params, and that's a replacement for fallback equals true or false inside. So now let's look at generating the SEO for this specific page, because right now we are not displaying anything really. In fact, what would happen is the root layout SEO is going to take over, and that's why it says the title is Kulkarni Ankita's website, and the description is the general description that we had given in the root layout. In order for us to fix this and fix this canonical URL as well, because the canonical URL should be slash the category, we need to implement a new function. And that is where the concept of dynamic metadata comes in play. Now we have generate static params that pre-renders our routes. We have the get data function that displays on the page. We need another function here that we need to export. And let's call this function generate metadata. Now, this function also has access to params automatically. And here we are pretty much just going to generate the params. So what we are going to do is based on the params, based on the page that the user is on, and we would know that through params, we are going to just get the data. So again, the function that we have here, get data, we're going to use it. So we could just copy this and paste it. And again, similar to this, we can just paste this as well. So we can say it's going to be params. Now, we don't need all this information. All we need is the slug and also the description. And here we are going to return exactly what we had in the metadata object. Title, we are going to return description, and we are going to return alternates, which is going to have the canonical URL itself. Now we already know what the canonical URL is going to be. It's just going to be slash category slug. Now when it comes to title, it's going to be the title that we want to give. So for example, again, we can say blog posts on category slug, which is going to be blog posts on Next.js or blog posts on GraphQL and so on. But when it comes to description, we can have the category description from here. So now our SEO is generated. So if we go back and let's say we refresh the page just to be sure, let's just go to Next.js. And if we go to the title, first of all, it says blog post on Next.js, which is exactly what we want. And if we head over to the OG description, it's going to say learn Next.js using the best blog post and tutorial. Now, it does say 2023, which does make it look outdated, but let's tweak the year if we like it over here too. So that's something we can look into, but I can just do new date.get full year, for instance. Now I can do the same in the rest of the pages as well. So we can convert this and paste it. Similarly, wherever there is a year, we can just convert that. Because I'm writing blog posts quite frequently and it doesn't make sense for me to tell SEO that it's old. All right, so now we have done this. We can get rid of this altogether. As you can see, this is exactly the category slug description and things we had, and title and description we had set up here. So this works as expected. All right, so now let's look at migrating our blog page. Now, if you click on any individual blog, you get a 404 because remember, we're still calling at index.js page and the app router cannot necessarily discover this page yet. We need to rename it to page.jsx. But before we do that, I want to quickly walk you through the blog page so you know exactly how to refactor it if you were to do something similar. This specific blog page has the category, has the title, has the entire blog post written in MDX. We have the category slug and we have the slug. Additionally, we have some client functionality where if you increment the specific count, then we are updating and sending a request to the database to update the specific count. Similarly, if you refresh the page, then this count stays. So this part is in fact dynamic. This 25 count is dynamic. So we need to make changes to the way we approach the specific page. So let's tweak that now. So let's first rename this to page.jsx. Then immediately, if we go to that specific page, it's going to start complaining about certain functions we're using from the pages router, but that's a good sign. We have now exposed this page to the app router. Now let's just do exactly what we did before in the page.jsx for the category URL. Let's also copy the dynamic params because fallback is also going to be false here, and expose this. And let's go ahead and change this to get data. Now we don't need to export it, and params could just directly come as params here. All right, so now let's get rid of props. Again, don't need it. And instead of getting post data from the params, from the parameter, let's get post data equals await get data, for example, and pass in the params. The params will come from here, for instance, for the slug, and this function will be now async function. Now, get data params automatically accesses the category URL and the slug to fetch the MDX document. Now, as I mentioned before, if you take a look at this folder and go to the specific page, you will see a page for, let's say, server HTML hydration. It's going to access the front matter data from here, such as title, date, description, category, and so on, that we could fetch as well in the future to feed some information, such as for SEO. But then the source would be this. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We're getting the data, we're getting the source and the front matter and feeding it to the page. Now we don't need has mounted here. We have to tweak that later on. Let's just remove it because this would make this specific page a client component, which we don't want. Next, let's change this to generate static params. And instead of returning paths, let's just directly return this here. And since fallback is false, remember what we did inside of the category URL. We just need to export this because again, we don't need to we are not going to reload some new page here. We're just gonna return a 404. And that's exactly what we want to do here. So we have this now, but if we go to this specific function, it reads this specific directory that I have, the post directory, looks at the category URL, and then fetches the data and creates a specific structure to render it on the page. I am returning params because in pages router it needed me to. We don't need to do that in the app router anymore, so we could get rid of it. All right, so we have done a lot. Let's go ahead and test out our code. Now, if we go and refresh the page, you can see now there are certain components that need client functionality that we haven't necessarily marked as client. So if you take a look at the page, we will move this later on to generate static params and use dynamic SEO for it. Let's just copy it for now. But if you take a look at post page and the like button page, let's look at like button page. All of this is the like button functionality for that specific blog post. And this could easily be a client component. So let's just add client, use client here, for instance. Similarly, if we go to post page and if we take a look at all of this, such as MDX remote, and look at the components as well, or look at share posts, this also needs a client functionality and needs us to tweak the router. We're going to comment this for now. But if we take a look at components, we also need to turn this into a client component. Now, if we go back to the app, again, it's complaining about it because in post, we still have share post. Let's comment that out. Now, we are using has mounted in page. So let's comment that out as well. If we go to like button, we also need to convert this into a client component because this also needs it to be a client page. Now, if you refresh the page, you can see that all the data has been rendered on the page. Now, if we go to the page component itself, now it's also time for us to integrate SEO. Again, what we had done before, let's just say generate metadata equals a specific function which will return title, description, and so on, for instance. Now we are going to use the same code here and pass it in. And we are going to get params from here as well. Now we have post data, We need a comma here, and we also need to convert this into a async function. Now, post data front matter, and front matter has title and all of that. So if you take a look at any of the blog posts, every blog post has title, date, and so on, which we need. So here we're gonna have title, description, image URL. We are also gonna have OG URL and all of that, canonical URL later on. So like we'll have alternates, canonical, and we can pretty much grab all of this from here. So we can just copy this thing and paste it. Now this would basically be params dot category slug and then params dot slug. Similarly, this title is going to be title. We are going to grab abstract because that's what we call in front matter. And then for the images, we are going to have OG image, with image underscore URL, for instance. So this is our metadata function. So we could pretty much just get rid of this altogether. And also this empty fragment, because now we can just wrap it up in a grid. All right, so now if I refresh the page and go back to the developer tools head element, you should see the description, title, canonical URL, and so on getting displayed here right away, which is exactly what we're looking for. But if you notice here, you will see two errors. One is that we definitely need to pass in slug. So we could just say params dot slug, for instance. And we don't need to pass slug here. And we need to pass slug here. So we could fetch the data dynamically. And now you can see that the hydration error has also disappeared. And we can already see the like button here getting displayed. Beautiful. So our page, the category slug page or just the regular slug page, has also been transformed into a server component with individual parts being a client component. Now with like button, we have two options. One is that we are already using API routes from pages. We could migrate that inside of the app folder and then just utilize that, for instance. Or we could also convert this into a server action because we can. So there are two options here. Or we could convert this into a server action. Now I'm just going to keep my code as is. Now there are several other pages inside my website which are very similar to what I've already shown. So we're not going to repeat the same things again and again because it's the same code altogether. But I wanted to put together this video to show you exactly how to migrate your app from the pages router to the app router and create a comprehensive video for it. Thank you so much for watching this specific video. If you really enjoyed this deep dive, then please let me know what you think, and if you want me to create more videos like this one or the topics that you want me to create videos about, please comment below and let me know. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.